I never thought I'd walk into my own parents' house and witness them toasting to my financial ruin. There they were, champagne flutes raised high, my sister Amy beaming in her designer outfit, her fiancé Mark smirking beside her. My mother's voice rang out with cruel clarity. "Thanks for the wedding present, Jackie." They all laughed, completely unaware that I was standing in the doorway, hearing every word. They had sold my lake house, my legal inheritance from Grandma Eleanor, to fund Amy's ridiculous $230,000 wedding. I felt my heart shatter, and then, surprisingly quickly, reform into something harder. They had no idea what was coming. Grandma Eleanor was always my person. While my parents doted on Amy, my grandmother took me under her wing. Every summer from the time I was 7 until I went to college, I spent 3 glorious months at her lake house in northern Wisconsin. The property had been in our family for 3 generations, purchased by my great-grandfather back in the 1930s when the area was just starting to be developed. The lake house wasn't fancy by today's standards, but it was perfect. A sturdy 2-story cabin with a wraparound porch, 4 bedrooms, and the most spectacular views of Lake Winnipesaukee you could imagine. The wooden dock stretched 30 feet into the crystal-clear water, ending with a small covered seating area where Grandma and I would sit for hours, fishing or just talking about life. "This lake has healing powers, Jackie," she would tell me, her voice gentle as the lapping water. "Whenever life gets too loud, too complicated, you come here. The water will wash it all away." And she was right. Through my awkward teenage years, my first heartbreak, and later, the stress of my marketing career in Chicago, the lake house remained my sanctuary. Grandma taught me to swim, to sail, to identify every bird that visited our feeders. She showed me how to fix a leaky roof, change the oil in the old boat, and winterize the pipes when fall came. "A woman should know how to take care of her home," she'd say, passing me tools while giving step-by-step instructions. When Grandma Eleanor passed away 14 months ago at 87, I was devastated but not surprised when her will specified that the lake house would come to me. To Jacqueline Marie Winters, I leave my lake house property and all its contents, knowing she will cherish it as I have. The reading of the will had been tense. I caught the disappointed glances between my parents and the way Amy's mouth tightened into a thin line. Mom always said the property would be divided, my mother had whispered to my father, just loud enough for me to hear. But Grandma's lawyer, Mr. Hendricks, was clear. Eleanor was explicit about this bequest. "The property goes to Jackie, free and clear." For a few uncomfortable weeks, there were pointed comments about fairness and equal shares, but eventually, the tension seemed to dissipate. Amy received Grandma's investment portfolio, which was substantial, and my parents got the family home in Madison. I thought everyone had made peace with Grandma's wishes. With the lake house officially mine, I threw myself into planning renovations. The place needed updating if I wanted to use it year-round, which was my dream. I hired an architect who specialized in preserving the character of older homes while making them more energy efficient. We drafted plans for better insulation, a new heating system, and a small home office where I could work remotely. I planned to split my time between Chicago and the lake, with the goal of eventually moving there permanently. Then came Amy's engagement to Mark Peterson last November. Mark came from money, old Chicago money, the kind that doesn't need to flaunt it but somehow still does. He was handsome in that polished way that always seemed slightly artificial to me. But Amy was over the moon. At 32, 2 years older than me, she'd been dating aggressively since college, determined to land the perfect husband. "He's perfect, Jackie," she gushed during our obligatory sister lunch after the proposal. "His family owns that chain of luxury hotels, you know. And he's taking me to the Maldives for 2 weeks to celebrate." I was genuinely happy for her. Despite our differences, despite the favoritism that had colored our childhood, I wanted Amy to be happy. "That's wonderful," I told her sincerely. "I'm thrilled for you." What I didn't realize was how quickly Amy's wedding plans would spiral out of control. She wanted a 300-person guest list, a historic mansion venue, a 10-piece band, a designer dress from New York. Every time I spoke with my parents, they seemed more strained, more worried about the mounting costs. "Your sister only gets married once," my mother would say, her voice tight. "We want her to have everything she's dreamed of." I offered to help financially, even though my marketing job paid modestly. I could contribute $5,000. I suggested during a family dinner in January. "That's sweet, honey," my father said, patting my hand. "But this is our responsibility. We'll figure it out." I should have seen the signs, should have noticed the calculating looks they exchanged, the whispered conversations that stopped when I entered the room. But I was too focused on my own plans, on the contractor schedules and material selections for the lake house renovation. The first phase of renovations was scheduled to begin in early May. I took a Thursday and Friday off work and drove the 4 hours from Chicago to the lake, excited to meet with the contractor and get things started. As I turned down the familiar gravel road that led to the property, I noticed an unfamiliar pickup truck and what looked like a moving van parked in the driveway. Confusion turned to alarm as I parked and approached the house. The front door was open, and I could see strangers inside, carrying furniture, arranging items as if they owned the place. "Excuse me," I called out, my voice sharper than intended. "What are you doing in my house?" An older man turned, surprised. "Your house?" "I'm sorry, there must be some mistake. We closed on this property last week. I'm Jim Parsons, and this is my wife, Linda." My blood ran cold. "That's impossible. This house belongs to me. I inherited it from my grandmother." Linda Parsons looked uncomfortable, exchanging a glance with her husband. "Perhaps you should call your family, dear." The Sellers were. She consulted a paper in her hand, Thomas and Margaret Winters. They said they were handling the sale for their daughter. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. "That's my parents' names," I whispered. "But I never authorized any sale. This is a mistake." Jim's expression softened with pity. "I'm sorry, but we have all the legal paperwork. The sale is complete. Maybe there's been a miscommunication in your family." Miscommunication. The word seemed absurdly inadequate for what was happening. With shaking hands, I pulled out my phone and called my father. No answer. I tried my mother. Straight to voicemail. "I need to sort this out," I told the Parsons, my voice surprisingly steady despite the hurricane of emotions inside me. "Please don't move anything else in until I've spoken with my parents." But as I walked back to my car, I saw something that stopped me cold. The mailbox at the end of the driveway no longer read Winters. It had been replaced with a shiny new one reading Peterson. Peterson. Mark's last name. This wasn't a coincidence. This was something much worse. The 40-minute drive to my parents' house in Madison was a blur of rage, confusion, and heartbreak. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel as questions pounded through my head like hailstones. How could they sell property that wasn't theirs? Why hadn't they even mentioned it to me? What gave them the right to steal my inheritance? I pulled into their driveway too fast, gravel spraying as I braked. The house was lit up, more cars than usual parked outside. I recognized Amy's sleek black Audi and an unfamiliar luxury SUV that screamed expensive. As I approached the front door, I could hear laughter and the clink of glasses from inside. Instead of knocking, I used my key, stepping quietly into the entryway. The sounds of celebration led me to the living room, where I stopped, frozen by the scene before me. My parents, Amy, Mark, and an older couple who had to be Mark's parents, were gathered around the coffee table with champagne flutes. They were laughing, their faces flushed with excitement or alcohol or both. The table was covered with wedding magazines, fabric swatches, and what looked like venue brochures. To Amy and Mark, my father was saying, raising his glass high, "And to the most spectacular wedding Madison has ever seen." And to Jackie, my mother added with a laugh that sliced through me like a knife, "Thanks for the wedding present, sweetheart." They all laughed again, completely oblivious to my presence until I spoke. "What wedding present would that be, Mom? The lake house that Grandma left to me? The property you had no right to sell?" 6 heads whipped toward me in perfect unison. The room went so silent, I could hear the ice shifting in their glasses. "Jackie," my mother finally stammered. "We weren't expecting you." "Clearly," I said, stepping fully into the room. "I just came from the lake house." Imagine my surprise when I found strangers moving in, claiming they'd purchased it from you. My father stood up, setting his glass down carefully. "Honey, we can explain. Please, sit down." "I'll stand, thanks," I replied, surprised by the steel in my voice. Explain how you sold property that doesn't belong to you. My mother glanced nervously at Mark's parents, who were watching the unfolding drama with uncomfortable expressions. Perhaps we should discuss this privately, Jackie. No need, I said. Since everyone here seems to be in on it, we might as well have this conversation together. So tell me, how exactly did you manage to sell my house? My father cleared his throat. We've temporarily borrowed against your inheritance, Jackie. The lake house was just sitting there, and Amy's wedding is a family priority. Borrowed? I repeated incredulously. You sold it. The new owners are moving in as we speak. It's just a financial arrangement, my mother interjected quickly. Once the wedding is over, we can start saving to replace the property. Amy finally spoke up, her voice irritatingly casual. Jackie, don't be so dramatic. You don't even use the lake house regularly. My wedding is once in a lifetime, and we needed the money now, not later. I turned to her, barely containing my fury. It wasn't yours or theirs to sell, Amy. Grandma left it to me, not to the family, not to be used as an ATM for your wedding. We're your parents, my father said firmly. Sometimes we have to make decisions for the good of the whole family. You'll understand when you're married someday. The condescension in his tone pushed me over the edge. I understand perfectly. You stole from me. The house was legally mine. How did you even complete the sale without my signature? A flash of guilt crossed my mother's face before she composed herself. We handled the paperwork. It's all taken care of. The implications hit me like a tidal wave. You forged my signature, I whispered, horrified. That's fraud. That's a crime. Now you're being ridiculous, my father said dismissively. This is a family matter, not a legal one. I glanced at Mark, who had remained conspicuously silent, then at his parents, who looked increasingly uncomfortable. Did you know about this? I asked them directly. That the property was being sold without the actual owner's knowledge or consent? Mark's father shifted in his seat. We were assured everything was above board. By whom? I demanded. No one answered, but the glances exchanged around the room told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't a spontaneous decision. This had been planned, probably for months. How much? I asked, my voice breaking slightly. How much did you sell my inheritance for? The wedding is costing $230,000, my mother said defensively. These things are expensive, Jackie. The venue alone is $75,000. I laughed, a harsh sound that surprised even me. $230,000 for one day. And you think that justifies stealing my house? We didn't steal anything, Amy snapped. Stop being so selfish. This is my special day we're talking about. Tears were threatening, but I refused to let them fall. You know what, Amy? You deserve each other. All of you. I turned to leave, but my father grabbed my arm. Jackie, be reasonable. We're family. We'll make it right eventually. I pulled away from him. Family doesn't steal from each other. Family doesn't forge signatures and commit fraud. I don't know what we are anymore, but it's not family. As I walked out, I heard Amy call after me. You're just jealous, because no one would ever spend this much on a wedding for you. Her words stung, not because they were true, but because they revealed how little she understood what really mattered. I got into my car and drove away, tears finally flowing freely down my face. I checked into a hotel in Madison that night, unable to face the 4-hour drive back to Chicago in my emotional state. Lying on the generic hotel bed, I stared at the ceiling, replaying the confrontation over and over. The casual way they'd justified their theft, the dismissal of my feelings, the complete lack of remorse. The next morning, before checking out, I made a detour to the county records office. I needed to see the sale documents for myself, to understand exactly what they'd done. The clerk was helpful, pulling up the recent transaction with a few clicks. Sale price $415,000. She read off the screen. Sold by Thomas and Margaret Winters to James and Linda Peterson. Peterson, not Parsons. The people I'd met at the lake house had lied about their identity. And they weren't just any Petersons, they were Mark's parents. But something else caught my attention. $415,000? Are you sure? The clerk nodded, turning the screen so I could see for myself. $415,000. nearly twice what my mother had claimed was needed for the wedding. Where had the rest of the money gone? And why sell to Mark's parents of all people? The betrayal deepened, layers of deception piling one on top of another. This wasn't just about funding Amy's wedding. Something else was going on. Something they were all hiding from me. And I was determined to find out what it was. They forged your signature? Taylor Matthews almost choked on her coffee. We were sitting in her downtown Chicago office the Monday, after my disastrous visit to Madison. Taylor had been my roommate in college, and was now a successful real estate attorney. More importantly, she was the one person I knew I could trust completely. Yes, I confirmed, pushing the copies of documents I'd obtained across her desk. That's definitely not my signature. I've never even seen these papers before. Taylor studied the documents, her expression growing more troubled by the second. Jackie, this is serious. Forgery, fraud, false representation. These are criminal offenses. Your parents could face jail time. The words sent a chill through me despite my anger. I don't necessarily want them in jail, Taylor. I just want my house back. She leaned back in her chair, thinking. The good news is that the sale might be vulnerable legally. Since you never authorized it and they forged your signature, we have grounds to challenge the transaction. The bad news is that it's your parents. Are you prepared for what this could do to your relationship with them? I laughed bitterly. What relationship? They stole my inheritance, lied to my face, and dismissed my feelings entirely. They made it clear where I stand in the family hierarchy. Taylor nodded sympathetically. I understand. Still, legal action against family is never simple. Have you tried talking to them again, now that you've had time to process? They're not taking my calls, I admitted. My mother sent a text saying they'll discuss it after the wedding, and that I should stop causing drama during Amy's special time. Classic, Taylor muttered. She tapped her pen against the desk thoughtfully. Let's approach this methodically. First, we need to determine the true market value of the property. $415,000 seems low for lakefront in that area, especially with the size of the lot. She was right. The property included not just the house, but 3 acres of land with 200 feet of lake frontage. Over the next week, I worked with Taylor to get an independent appraisal. The result was shocking even to me. $680,000, I told Taylor over the phone when the report came in. They undersold it by more than $250,000. That confirms my suspicion, Taylor replied. This wasn't just about raising money for a wedding. This was a sweetheart deal between your parents and the Petersons. The question is why? I had been wondering the same thing, and had spent hours digging through family financial records I had access to. What I discovered was disturbing. I think my parents have been supporting Amy financially for years, I told Taylor during our next meeting. I found bank transfers, paid credit card statements, even a down payment for her condo that they claimed was a loan but never collected on. Taylor raised her eyebrows. How much are we talking about? At least $200,000 over the past 5 years, probably more. Meanwhile, I put myself through graduate school with loans I'm still paying off. The pattern of favoritism seems pretty established, Taylor observed, but that still doesn't explain the connection to Mark's family or why they'd sell so far below market value. Our investigation continued. Taylor used her legal contacts to obtain copies of the notary records, bank transfers, and all documentation related to the sale. Meanwhile, I reached out to Detective Sarah Wilson, an acquaintance from my volunteer work with a women's shelter, to get advice about the potential fraud case. Technically, you have enough for criminal charges, Detective Wilson told me over coffee one afternoon. Forging signatures on legal documents, fraudulent property transfer. It's open and shut. But I have to ask, are you sure you want to go down that road with your parents? It was a question I'd been asking myself constantly. Despite everything, the thought of my parents in legal trouble, possibly facing jail time, made my stomach twist. They had betrayed me in the worst way, yet they were still my parents. What are my options? I asked her. You could pursue civil remedies instead of criminal charges. Sue for the return of the property or financial damages. Or, she hesitated, you could try to resolve it outside the court system entirely. I nodded slowly. I need to think about it. Later that evening, while reviewing the documents Taylor had gathered, I discovered something that changed everything. The new deed listed the property as jointly owned by James and Linda Peterson, but an attached document included plans for subdividing the property for family use. A quick search revealed that Mark had a younger brother named Andrew who was getting married the following year. The plans showed the lake house lot being divided into 2 parcels, with a second home planned for the adjacent lot. This wasn't just about Amy's wedding. This was a calculated plan to acquire prime lakefront property at a bargain price, with my parents' willing participation. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Taylor. "Jackie, you're not going to believe what I found. I managed to get in touch with the real estate agent who handled the sale, an old colleague of mine. She told me the Petersons have been trying to buy property on that lake for years, but nothing was available. When they found out through Mark that your grandmother's house had been inherited by you, they approached your parents directly. So this whole thing was orchestrated by Mark's family?" I felt sick. It looks that way. And there's more. According to my contact, the original asking price was closer to market value, but the Petersons negotiated down, using the wedding as leverage. Essentially, they offered to pay for part of the wedding in exchange for a reduced price on the property. The pieces were falling into place now. This wasn't just family favoritism gone wild. It was a calculated business deal using my inheritance as currency. "What do you recommend?" I asked Taylor, a new determination hardening my voice. "Well, that depends on what you want. If you just want financial compensation, we could threaten a lawsuit and probably get a settlement. If you want the property back, we'd need to file for an injunction immediately to prevent any changes to the land while we challenge the sale." I thought about Grandma Eleanor, about the summers we'd spent on that dock, about her teaching me to be independent and stand up for myself. "I want the house back," I said firmly, "and I want them to understand that they can't just take what's mine." Taylor was silent for a moment. "There's a way we might be able to do this without immediately escalating to a court battle. I have an idea, but it's a bit unorthodox." "I'm listening," I said. As Taylor outlined her plan, I felt a strange sense of calm replacing the hurt and anger that had consumed me for weeks. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about justice and standing up for what was rightfully mine. It was about honoring Grandma Eleanor's wishes and the values she'd instilled in me. "Let's do it," I told Taylor when she finished. "But let's wait until the wedding day. If they want a day to remember, I'll give them one." As Amy's June wedding date approached, I adopted a surprising new strategy: compliance. I accepted my bridesmaid role with apparent grace, attended dress fittings without complaint, and even volunteered to help with various wedding tasks. My sudden change in attitude clearly relieved my parents, who seemed to think I'd gotten over the lake house situation. "I'm so glad you're being sensible about everything," my mother commented during a bridesmaids' luncheon in early May. "Family has to stick together." I smiled tightly, thinking of the legal documents Taylor was preparing. Yes, family is so important. Amy's wedding preparations had taken on a life of their own. What had started as an expensive event had evolved into something approaching obscene. The historic Willow Creek Manor had been booked for the ceremony and reception, a venue that typically hosted celebrity weddings and corporate galas. A celebrity chef was flying in from Los Angeles to create a custom menu. Amy's dress, a couture creation from a New York designer, reportedly cost $27,000 alone. "We've added a champagne fountain," Amy announced during a family dinner 3 weeks before the wedding. "And the florist is importing peonies from Japan since they're out of season here." My father nodded with strained enthusiasm, while my mother beamed proudly. Neither mentioned the cost, but I noticed the new lines of stress around my father's eyes, the way his hand shook slightly as he reached for his water glass. Working closely with the wedding preparations gave me access to information I wouldn't otherwise have had. One afternoon, while helping my mother organize RSVPs in her home office, I overheard a phone conversation that confirmed my suspicions about their financial situation. "Yes, we understand the second payment is due next week," my father was saying in the adjacent room, his voice low. "We're just waiting for the funds to clear from the equity line on the house." "Yes, our house, not the lake property." "I understand the catering can't be confirmed without the deposit." After he hung up, I heard my mother's worried voice. "Tom, I thought the lake house money would cover everything. Why did we need to take out a second mortgage?" Amy added the ice sculpture and upgraded the band, he replied, sounding exhausted. And the rehearsal dinner venue doubled their fee for the private room. We're committed now. We can't back out. What if Jackie finds out about the signature? The papers for the sale? She won't. And even if she did, what's she going to do? Sue her own parents? She doesn't have the money for a legal battle, and by the time she could save up, it would be too late. The Petersons are already planning their renovations. I quietly slipped out of the office, my heart pounding. Their casual dismissal of both my legal rights and my feelings solidified my resolve. They thought I was powerless, that I would just accept their betrayal because I lacked the resources to fight back. They had severely underestimated me. The next development came during a chance encounter with Mark at a coffee shop near my Chicago apartment. I suspected he'd engineered the accidental meeting, and his uncomfortable demeanor confirmed it. "Jackie," he said, sliding into the chair across from me without being invited. "I've been hoping to run into you." "Have you?" I replied coolly. "I thought you'd be busy with wedding plans." He had the grace to look embarrassed. "About that. And about the lake house. I want you to know I wasn't part of that initial decision. It was my parents and yours who worked out the arrangement." "Really?" I raised an eyebrow. "And yet you're benefiting from it." "It's complicated," he sighed. "My parents have been trying to buy on that lake for years. When they found out about your grandmother's property, they saw an opportunity. An opportunity to defraud me," I clarified. Mark winced. "Look, there's something you should know. My parents are planning to divide the property. Half for Amy and me as a vacation home, half for my brother Andrew and his fiancée." Though I'd already discovered this, hearing Mark confirm it sent a fresh wave of anger through me. So not only did they steal my property, but they're also planning to carve it up. The property that's been in my family for 3 generations? "I just thought you should hear it from someone directly," Mark said, standing up. "For what it's worth, I did suggest they pay you fair market value." I was overruled. As he walked away, I realized Mark was trying to distance himself from the scheme, perhaps even setting up some plausible deniability. It was too little, too late, but the information confirmed what Taylor and I had already pieced together. This wasn't just about Amy's wedding. It was about the Petersons acquiring prime real estate at a fraction of its worth. With just 2 weeks until the wedding, I strategically arranged a meeting with James and Linda Peterson, claiming I wanted to clear the air before the big day. They seemed relieved by my outreach, perhaps worried that I might cause a scene at the wedding. We met at an upscale restaurant in Chicago, the kind where privacy was part of the premium price. Linda Peterson was perfectly coiffed, wearing subtle but expensive jewelry that probably cost more than my annual salary. James Peterson had that confident demeanor of someone accustomed to getting his way in business and in life. "Jackie, we're so glad you reached out," Linda began after we'd ordered. "Family harmony is so important, especially at times like these." I smiled, channeling all my professional poise from years of client meetings. "I completely agree. That's why I wanted to meet. I think there have been some misunderstandings about the lake house situation." James Peterson nodded sagely. "These things happen in families. I'm sure your grandmother would want everyone to be happy." It took everything in me not to react to his presumption about what my grandmother would want. Instead, I maintained my pleasant expression. "I've been thinking about it, and I realized that fighting the situation would just cause more family tension. Amy's wedding should be the focus right now." The relief on their faces was almost comical. "That's very mature of you," Linda said, reaching across to pat my hand. "I knew you'd come around. And I promise, we'll take wonderful care of the property." "I'm sure you will," I replied. "I understand you're planning to divide it for both Mark and Andrew to use?" A flicker of surprise crossed James's face. "Yes, that's the long-term plan. The location is perfect for family gatherings, with enough space for both our sons to build their futures." "How nice," I said, taking a sip of water. "And the renovations are starting after the wedding?" "Almost immediately," Linda confirmed. "The architects have already drawn up plans. We're keeping the original structure of the cabin but modernizing everything inside. And adding a boathouse, of course." I nodded thoughtfully. "It sounds lovely. I hope you'll send me pictures." By the end of the dinner, the Petersons were completely at ease, convinced I'd accepted the situation and wouldn't cause any problems. They even invited me to visit once the renovations were complete, an offer that required all my acting skills to receive graciously. As the wedding day drew nearer, final preparations reached a fever pitch. Amy had become increasingly demanding, changing details at the last minute and berating vendors for minor issues. My parents looked exhausted, the financial strain showing in every tight smile and worried glance. The night before the wedding, during the rehearsal dinner at an exclusive downtown restaurant, I overheard a tense conversation between Mark and his father in a quiet corner. "The prenup isn't negotiable," James was saying firmly. "Our lawyers have been clear about this." "Amy's still pushing back," Mark replied. "She thinks it shows a lack of commitment." "The lake house property alone is worth nearly $700,000, his father countered. "Not to mention the trust fund. Everything needs to be protected." "I know, Dad. I'll make sure she signs before tomorrow." As I watched them from across the room, pieces of a new understanding fell into place. The Petersons weren't just wealthy. They were obsessed with protecting and growing that wealth. They had used Amy's desperation for a lavish wedding to manipulate my parents, who in turn had sacrificed my inheritance to maintain appearances and satisfy their favorite daughter. That night, back in my hotel room, I called Taylor one last time to confirm our plan was in place. "Everything's ready," she assured me. "The documents will be delivered by courier to both sets of parents during the reception, just as we discussed." "Are you sure you want to do it this way?" I thought about the months of hurt, the casual way they had dismissed my feelings, the property that meant so much more to me than just its monetary value. "I'm sure," I said firmly. "Tomorrow, everything changes." June 18th dawned clear and perfect, as if even the weather was conspiring to give Amy her dream wedding. Willow Creek Manor looked like something from a fairy tale, with its manicured gardens and historic stone facade. Inside, an army of florists, decorators, and coordinators transformed the already elegant spaces into something truly spectacular. As a bridesmaid, I arrived early for hair and makeup, sitting patiently while a stylist created elaborate updos for Amy's 7 attendants. Amy herself occupied the center of the bridal suite, alternating between excited exclamations and harsh critiques of everyone's work. "The flowers are the wrong shade of pink," she snapped at the wedding planner, a harried woman named Stephanie who had the patience of a saint. "I specifically said ballet slipper, not bubblegum." "Fix it." "Right away," Stephanie replied, hurrying out while typing frantically on her phone. My mother fluttered around Amy, adjusting her veil, offering champagne, handling any minor crisis that arose. My father kept appearing at the door with updates on guests arriving, the band setting up, the weather holding steady. Both looked happy but strained, the financial weight of the day visibly pressing down on them. "Jackie, be a dear and check on the table settings," my mother instructed me after my hair was done. "Make sure they've used the correct chargers, the gold ones, not the silver." I nodded and headed downstairs, using the opportunity to confirm that everything was in place for my own plans. Taylor had arranged for a paralegal from her firm to act as a courier, scheduled to arrive precisely at 3:45 during the height of the reception. The legal documents we'd prepared were comprehensive: fraud charges, property deed challenges, and injunctions against any further action on the lake house property. The ceremony itself was elaborate and lengthy. Amy had chosen a string quartet for the processional, and they played for nearly 30 minutes as the extensive wedding party made their way down the aisle. Mark stood at the altar looking uncomfortable in his tuxedo, his eyes darting occasionally to his parents in the front row. The Petersons sat rigidly perfect, surveying the proceedings like they were evaluating an investment property. Amy's entrance was pure theater. 2 small children held her 15-foot train, the $27,000 dress sparkling with thousands of hand-sewn crystals. My father looked both proud and terrified as he walked her down the aisle, perhaps calculating the cost of each step. The vows were traditional, with a few personalized additions that made me struggle not to roll my eyes. Amy promised to support Mark's ambitions and grace his arm at every important occasion, while Mark vowed to provide the life of comfort and luxury that Amy deserves. Through it all, I maintained my composure, smiling at appropriate moments and playing my role perfectly. No one looking at me would have guessed what was coming. The reception began at 2 o'clock in the grand ballroom. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above tables dressed in silk linens, each centerpiece a towering arrangement of imported flowers. The five-course meal was served by white-gloved waiters, each plate a work of art created by the celebrity chef who'd been flown in at astronomical expense. Champagne flowed freely, and the 10-piece band played softly during dinner before transitioning to dance music. My father's toast was emotional, his voice breaking as he talked about his little girl and how proud he was to give her this perfect day. He thanked the Petersons for their partnership and spoke about the joining of two wonderful families. When it was my turn to speak as maid of honor, I kept it brief but pointed. To Amy and Mark, I said, raising my glass, "May your marriage be built on honesty, respect, and true partnership. May you always remember that real love isn't about grand gestures or expensive celebrations, but about how you treat each other when no one else is watching. And may you never forget that true family supports each other without taking what doesn't belong to them." A few confused glances circulated, but most guests simply applauded politely, missing the subtext entirely. My parents exchanged nervous looks, while the Petersons shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Amy glared at me briefly, before turning her megawatt smile back to the crowd. The celebration continued, a whirl of dancing, drinking, and performative joy. I checked my watch repeatedly as 3:30 approached, positioning myself where I could see the entrance to the ballroom, while maintaining casual conversations with various guests. At exactly 3:42, I spotted him. Taylor's colleague, dressed in a nondescript suit, carrying a leather messenger bag. He spoke briefly to the event coordinator, who pointed toward my parents. I watched as he approached them, handed over a large envelope, and then moved on to deliver a similar package to the Petersons. My father opened the envelope, with a puzzled expression that quickly transformed into shock. He pulled my mother aside, showing her the contents, their faces draining of color simultaneously. Across the room, a similar scene was playing out with the Petersons, James's hand shaking visibly as he flipped through the pages. I excused myself from the conversation I'd been half participating in and made my way to the bar, positioning myself to be easily found, but not obviously waiting for the confrontation I knew was coming. It took less than 5 minutes. My father reached me first, my mother close behind him. Their faces were masks of panic and fury. "What have you done?" my father hissed, keeping his voice low to avoid creating a scene. I sipped my champagne calmly. "I've protected what's legally mine. You should read the documents carefully." "Fraud charges?" My mother's voice was barely a whisper. "Against your own parents? Have you lost your mind?" "I didn't lose anything, Mom. You took it. You forged my signature and sold property that wasn't yours to sell." Before they could respond, James and Linda Peterson joined our tense circle, their carefully maintained composure cracking around the edges. "We need to discuss this immediately," James said, gesturing toward a door leading to a private anteroom. Now, once inside the smaller room, away from the celebration continuing obliviously in the ballroom, the facade of civility completely collapsed. "This is outrageous," James Peterson nearly shouted, waving the documents. "These accusations could damage our reputation, our business interests." "They're not accusations," I replied steadily. "They're facts. You knowingly participated in a fraudulent property transfer. The signatures were forged, the property was never legally for sale, and you knew it." "We were assured everything was legitimate," Linda protested, looking to my parents for support. My father ran a hand through his hair, his desperation evident. "Jackie, please. This is your sister's wedding day. Can't this wait?" "It's waited long enough," I replied. 3 months of watching you all act like what you did was acceptable. 3 months of being dismissed and devalued. "What do you want?" James Peterson demanded. "Money? Is that what this is about?" I laughed softly. "No, Mr. Peterson. This isn't about money. It's about justice. It's about my property, which was never yours or my parents' to buy or sell." "We can work something out," my mother pleaded. "There's no need for legal action that would hurt all of us." "I've already filed for an emergency injunction," I informed them. "As of 9 o'clock this morning, the lake house sale has been legally frozen. No renovations, no property division, no changes of any kind until the court rules on the fraud case." The color drained from my father's face. "You can't be serious." "I've never been more serious about anything in my life," I replied. I gave you multiple chances to make this right. You chose not to. Do you have any idea what you've done? James Peterson's voice had dropped to a dangerous level. The money for this wedding, the venue, the vendors, everything was contingent on that property deal. My mother gasped. What are you saying? I'm saying, James continued, his gaze cold, that our agreement was clear. We would contribute to the wedding costs in exchange for favorable terms on the property. If the property deal is now in jeopardy, so is our financial arrangement. The door opened suddenly, and Amy burst in, still in her elaborate gown, Mark trailing behind her with a worried expression. What's going on? She demanded. Dad, you're missing my father-daughter dance. No one answered immediately, the tension in the room too thick to penetrate. Amy looked from face to face, her expression darkening. Seriously, what's happening? Why does everyone look like someone died? My father finally spoke, his voice hollow. There's been a complication with the lake house sale, sweetheart. Jackie has filed legal papers challenging the transaction. Amy's gaze snapped to me, fury replacing confusion. You did what? Today? Of all days? The timing seemed appropriate, I replied calmly. Since my inheritance was used to fund today's festivities without my consent. Is this true? Mark asked his father, finally breaking his silence. You said the property purchase was completely legitimate. James Peterson straightened his tie, composing himself. It's a simple misunderstanding that will be cleared up quickly. Forgery isn't a misunderstanding, I corrected him. It's a crime. And the authorities are very interested in taking statements from everyone involved. Authorities? My mother swayed slightly, and my father put an arm around her to steady her. You've gone to the police? Not yet, I said. But I will if this isn't resolved properly. Amy's face contorted with rage. You vindictive bitch! You're ruining my wedding because you're jealous. Because no one would ever throw a wedding like this for you. Her words echoed those she'd hurled at me months earlier during our first confrontation. This time, they didn't hurt. This time, I recognized them for what they were. The desperate flailing of someone who had always gotten her way and couldn't handle being thwarted. This isn't about your wedding, Amy, I said quietly. This is about right and wrong. This is about the fact that our parents stole from me to give to you, like they've always done. And this time, they crossed a legal line to do it. The silence that followed was deafening. In that moment, looking at their shocked, angry, frightened faces, I finally understood the true power of standing up for myself, not in anger or revenge, but in calm, determined justice. We should rejoin the reception, I suggested mildly. People will be wondering where the bride and groom are. As we filed out of the room, I caught Mark whispering urgently to his father, their expressions tense. The perfect wedding day had been irreversibly altered, not by my actions, but by the consequences of their own. Back in the ballroom, the band played on. The guests danced, completely unaware of the drama unfolding around them. I watched as my sister plastered on a smile and returned to her celebration, determination in every line of her body to maintain the illusion of the perfect day. But the damage was done. The truth was out, and nothing would ever be the same again. The remainder of the reception continued like a well-choreographed play where half the cast had forgotten their lines. Amy danced, laughed, and posed for photographs with mechanical precision, her smile never quite reaching her eyes. My parents circulated among guests with fixed expressions, accepting congratulations while occasionally shooting worried glances my way. The Petersons had disappeared entirely, presumably to consult with their attorneys via phone. I maintained my position as dutiful bridesmaid, fulfilling my obligations while watching the facade crumble behind the scenes. Around 5:30, as the evening portion of the reception was beginning, Mark approached me at the edge of the dance floor. You could have waited, he said, his voice low and controlled. Any other day but this one. I turned to face him fully. When would have been a good time, Mark? After you and your parents divided up my property? After the renovations started? After you erased every trace of my family's history there? He had the decency to look uncomfortable. It wasn't my idea, you know. The property deal. That was my father's doing. And yet you didn't stop it. You didn't warn me. You were happy to benefit from it. Look, he sighed, running a hand through his carefully styled hair. My parents have certain expectations about maintaining family wealth. The lake house was just a good investment opportunity from their perspective. At my expense, I pointed out. What exactly do you want to happen now? He asked, glancing toward Amy, who was watching us suspiciously from across the room. I want my property returned to me, legally and completely. I want acknowledgement of the wrong that was done, and I want assurance it will never happen again. Mark nodded slowly. I'll talk to my father. Maybe we can reach some kind of settlement without this becoming a public legal battle. My attorney will be in touch, I replied, stepping away as Amy began moving purposefully in our direction. I avoided further confrontation for the next hour, but as the reception began winding down, my father cornered me near the exit. We need to talk, Jacqueline, he said, using my full name as he always did when he was serious. Not here, not now, but tomorrow. Your mother and I want to understand exactly what you're doing. I think the legal documents explain that pretty clearly, I replied. He shook his head, looking suddenly older than his 58 years. This isn't you, Jackie. This vindictiveness, these threats. We're your family. Family doesn't steal from each other, I said quietly. Family doesn't forge signatures or commit fraud. Those were your words to me when I confronted you months ago, remember? Before he could respond, a commotion erupted across the ballroom. Amy was standing in the center of the dance floor, face flushed, voice raised, clearly in the middle of a heated argument with Mark. I am not signing anything today, she was shouting, heedless of the guests turning to stare. This is my wedding day, for God's sake! Mark was trying to quiet her, his expression a mix of embarrassment and determination. Amy, please, let's discuss this privately. It's just a standard agreement. A prenup? On my wedding day? Are you kidding me? Her voice carried easily across the now silent room. We discussed this. You said we'd figure it out after the wedding. James Peterson stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. The agreement needs to be signed today, Amy. Given recent developments, it's essential to protect the family interests. Amy's gaze snapped to me, standing with my father at the edge of the room. This is your fault, she accused, pointing dramatically. You and your stupid lake house! You've ruined everything! The scene deteriorated rapidly from there. Amy threw her bouquet to the floor, mascara streaking down her face as she stormed out, Mark following with quick apologies to stunned guests. The perfect wedding was unraveling spectacularly, and I felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and sadness watching it happen. Are you happy now? My mother asked, appearing beside me, her voice barely audible. I turned to her, suddenly exhausted by all of it. None of this had to happen, Mom. All you had to do was respect Grandma's wishes and my legal rights to the property. We were trying to create a perfect day for your sister, she insisted, at my expense, as always. I gathered my purse, ready to leave. I'll be at the Madison Grand Hotel until tomorrow afternoon. My lawyer will contact you on Monday to begin formal proceedings. As I turned to go, my mother grabbed my arm. Jackie, wait. What if we tried to make it right? Would you drop the legal charges? That depends on what making it right means to you, I replied cautiously. Let us talk to the Petersons. Maybe we can unwind the sale somehow. I gently removed her hand from my arm. It's too late for maybe, Mom. I need certainties now. But yes, if the property is returned to me, fully and legally, I would consider dropping the fraud charges. Hope flickered briefly in her eyes before reality seemed to set in. The money's been spent, Jackie. The wedding, the deposits, everything. We can't just give back $415,000. That's a problem you created, I reminded her. And one you'll need to solve if you want to avoid the consequences of fraud. I left the reception then, ignoring the curious stares and whispered questions from guests who had witnessed fragments of the drama. Back in my hotel room, I kicked off the painful bridesmaid shoes and called Taylor to update her on the day's events. It sounds like the documents had exactly the impact we intended, she said after I'd filled her in. What's your next move? I wait, I replied, stretching out on the bed. The ball's in their court now. I didn't have to wait long. At 9:30 the next morning, I received a text from my father asking me to meet them at their house at 11. When I arrived, I found not just my parents but also the Petersons, Amy, and Mark, all seated in the living room like participants in the world's most uncomfortable family reunion. James Peterson spoke first, his lawyer's demeanor firmly in place. After considerable discussion, we've come to a potential resolution. We propose unwinding the property sale, returning the lake house to your ownership, with certain financial considerations to account for funds already spent. What financial considerations? I asked, remaining standing while they all Saturday. The wedding expenses have been paid, my father explained. That money can't be recovered. We're proposing that you take back the lake house but assume responsibility for the $230,000 that went to the wedding costs. In what form? I asked, already knowing I wouldn't like the answer. A lien against the property, James Peterson answered smoothly. Payable when you eventually sell it or upon your death, whichever comes first. I actually laughed. So I get my stolen property back, but only if I agree to pay you for the privilege? No, that's not making it right. Be reasonable, Jackie, my mother pleaded. We don't have the money to pay you back directly. You have your house, I pointed out. The one you took a second mortgage on to pay for even more wedding expenses. You could sell it. My father looked stricken. Sell our home? Where would we live? You could rent, I suggested. Many people do. Amy, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke up. This is insane. You're talking about making Mom and Dad homeless over a stupid lake house. No one's becoming homeless, I corrected her. They'd just need to downsize, like many people their age do. Alternatively, you could sell your condo and move back in with them. The proceeds from your place would probably cover a significant portion of what they owe. My condo? Amy looked appalled. Why should I have to give up my home because of this? Because you benefited from the fraud, I said simply. $415,000 worth of benefit, to be exact. Mark, who had been observing carefully, finally joined the conversation. What if we covered the wedding costs? Would that satisfy your requirements for dropping the legal action? All eyes turned to him in surprise, including his father's. Mark, we discussed this, James Peterson said warningly. No, Dad. You and Mom discussed it and decided. But I'm not comfortable being part of this anymore. He turned to me. Jackie's right. What happened was wrong, legally and morally. If Amy and I repay the $230,000 for the wedding, and your parents return the lake house to you, would you consider that making things right? Before I could answer, Amy exploded. Are you serious right now? You want us to start our marriage $230,000 in debt? For her? For doing the right thing, Mark corrected her. And it wouldn't be debt. We'd use part of my trust fund. The tension in the room was palpable as Amy and Mark stared at each other, clearly continuing an argument that had begun during or after the wedding. I need to consult with my attorney, I finally said, breaking the uncomfortable silence. But I'm open to a solution that fully restores my property rights without any liens or encumbrances, and that acknowledges the wrong that was done. We'll need assurances that all legal actions will be dropped permanently, James Peterson insisted. And I'll need assurances that nothing like this will ever happen again, I countered. My mother, looking smaller and older than I'd ever seen her, spoke quietly. We made a terrible mistake, Jackie. We thought we were doing the right thing for the family, but we went about it all wrong. I'm sorry. It was the first genuine apology I'd heard from any of them, and despite everything, it affected me. I appreciate that, Mom. I really do. The meeting ended with an agreement to have our respective attorneys draft a settlement agreement. As I prepared to leave, Amy followed me to the door, her expression a complex mix of anger and something that might have been respect. You know, I never thought you had it in you, she said, to fight like this. There's a lot you don't know about me, Amy. She nodded slowly. Mark and I are postponing our honeymoon until this is sorted out. Just so you know. It wasn't quite an olive branch, but it was something. I hope we can resolve it quickly then. Over the next 2 weeks, the attorneys hammered out the details of the settlement. The lake house would be returned to me completely, with all legal fees and costs covered by the Petersons. Mark would indeed use part of his trust fund to reimburse my parents for the wedding expenses, allowing them to keep their home. In exchange, I would drop all fraud charges and legal actions. When the final papers were signed in early July, just 3 weeks after the wedding, I felt an enormous weight lift from my shoulders. The property was mine again, legally and completely. Justice had been served, not through the courts, but through my willingness to stand up and demand what was rightfully mine. The victory wasn't without costs, of course. My relationship with my family had been fundamentally altered. Amy and Mark left for a much scaled-down honeymoon in Hawaii instead of their planned month-long European tour. My parents were subdued, our conversations awkward and strained. But as Taylor reminded me when we celebrated with dinner after the final settlement was signed, some relationships need to change to become healthier. Sometimes standing up for yourself is the only way to reset the dynamics. She was right. And as difficult as the process had been, I knew I'd done what my grandmother would have wanted me to do. I had protected what was mine and stood up for myself, just as she had taught me all those summers by the lake. By mid-August, I was back at the lake house, overseeing the renovation work I'd planned before everything went sideways. The property felt different now, more precious somehow, having nearly lost it. Every creaking floorboard, every familiar view of the lake seemed to whisper that I had done the right thing. The contractor, Paul, and his team were making good progress on the updates. The new heating system was nearly installed, the insulation upgraded, the kitchen modernized while still maintaining the cabin's rustic charm. I'd decided to keep Grandma Eleanor's furniture, having it restored rather than replaced. Her presence still filled the house in the best possible way. "We should be finished with the major work by October," Paul told me one afternoon as we stood on the newly reinforced dock. "You'll be able to use it year-round, just like you wanted." "Perfect," I replied, watching the sunlight sparkle on the lake. "I'm planning to move in permanently by Thanksgiving." My decision to leave Chicago and make the lake house my primary residence had been surprisingly easy. My company had agreed to let me work remotely 4 days a week, coming into the office just once for meetings. The quiet of the lake suited me far better than the city's constant noise, and the thought of waking up to this view every day filled me with contentment. The aftermath of the wedding drama had settled into an uneasy new normal with my family. Amy and Mark had returned from their honeymoon and moved into a smaller condo, using most of Mark's accessible trust fund to cover the wedding expenses as agreed. According to the occasional texts I received from Amy, Mark's parents were still upset about the whole situation, but Mark himself had stood firm about making things right. My parents had been more difficult. The initial weeks after the settlement had been filled with hurt silence from their end. My mother had called once, her voice tight with barely contained emotion, to tell me they were trying to understand my actions, but needed time. I gave them the space they requested, focusing instead on healing my own hurt and rebuilding my life around the lake house. Then, on a warm September afternoon, an unexpected knock came at the front door. I opened it to find my father standing there, looking uncomfortable but determined. "Dad," I said, surprised. "I didn't know you were coming." "I should have called first," he acknowledged, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "But I was afraid I might lose my nerve." I stepped back, opening the door wider. "Come in." He entered cautiously, looking around at the partially renovated space. "The place looks good. Different, but still the same somehow." "That's what I was going for," I replied, leading him to the living room where we sat on opposite ends of Grandma's old sofa. "Can I get you something to drink?" He shook his head. "I'm here to talk, Jackie. Really talk, if you'll let me." Something in his voice, a vulnerability I rarely associated with my confident, sometimes overbearing father, made me simply nod and wait. "What we did was wrong," he began without preamble. "Not just legally wrong, but morally wrong. We betrayed your trust and disrespected your grandmother's wishes. There's no excuse for that, though God knows I've tried to come up with one to ease my conscience." I remained silent, letting him continue. "The truth is, your mother and I have always found it easier to give in to Amy. She's louder, more demanding, and frankly, more like us. You were always more like your grandmother, thoughtful, independent, content with less attention." He sighed heavily. "We mistook your self-sufficiency for not needing us as much, and that became our justification for giving Amy more. More attention, more resources, more everything. That doesn't explain forging my signature and selling my property," I pointed out quietly. "No, it doesn't," he agreed. "That was pure selfishness and poor judgment. We convinced ourselves we were doing it for the family, for Amy's happiness, but the truth is we did it because we didn't want to disappoint her or appear less successful than the Petersons." He looked down at his hands. We were wrong, and I'm deeply sorry, Jackie. The apology was so straightforward, so unqualified, that I found myself momentarily speechless. Your mother wanted to come too. He continued into the silence. But she's still working through her feelings. She knows she was wrong, but she's struggling with the way everything played out. I never wanted to hurt anyone, I said finally. I just couldn't let you take what was rightfully mine, what Grandma specifically wanted me to have. I know that now, my father nodded, and I respect you for standing up for yourself. I didn't then, but I do now. He hesitated before adding, your grandmother would have been proud of you. Those words, more than anything else he could have said, broke through the protective wall I'd built around my heart. Tears welled up unexpectedly. Thank you for saying that. We talked for nearly 2 hours, clearing the air in a way we never had before. He told me about the financial struggles they'd hidden for years, trying to maintain a lifestyle they couldn't really afford, especially with supporting Amy's expensive tastes. I shared how it had felt growing up as the less favored daughter, always expected to be more independent, less needy. I'd like us to try to rebuild our relationship, he said as he prepared to leave. On more equal, honest terms. If you're willing, I'd like that too, I told him, and realized I genuinely meant it. October brought Amy to my door, without Mark, but with a hesitant olive branch of her own. Our conversation was more strained than the one with my father had been, her apology more qualified, but it was a start. She was adjusting to a somewhat less extravagant lifestyle and admitted grudgingly that it wasn't as terrible as she'd feared. Mark's actually relieved, she confessed as we sat on the dock, watching the autumn leaves reflect in the still water. He never wanted the big show wedding anyway. That was me and Mom, and his parents pushing for something impressive. And now? I asked. She shrugged, pulling her jacket closer against the fall chill. Now we're figuring out what we actually want, not what everyone else expects. It's weird, but kind of liberating. By Thanksgiving, as promised, I had moved permanently to the lake house. The renovations were complete, transforming the seasonal cabin into a comfortable year-round home while preserving its essential character. My home office overlooked the lake, giving me the most inspiring workplace I could imagine. I invited my family for Thanksgiving dinner, unsure if they would accept but feeling it was important to extend the invitation. To my surprise, they all came: my parents, Amy and Mark, even Mark's brother Andrew and his fiancée Jessica. The gathering was slightly awkward at first, but warmed as the day progressed. After dinner, I found my mother in Grandma Eleanor's bedroom, looking at old family photographs I'd placed on the dresser. She loved you so much, my mother said softly. I was always a little jealous of your relationship with her. The admission startled me. You were? She nodded, picking up a photo of Grandma and me on the dock, fishing poles in hand. My mother and I were never close like that. We were too similar, both stubborn and quick-tempered. She smiled sadly. I think I favored Amy because she reminded me of myself. I understood her in a way I never quite understood you. I always thought it was because she was more like the daughter you wanted, I admitted. Oh, Jackie, my mother sighed. I wanted both my daughters. I just didn't know how to show it equally. She set the photograph down carefully. What you did, standing up to us about the lake house, it forced me to see you differently, to respect your strength in a way I never had before. It wasn't a complete healing of all the years of favoritism and hurt, but it was a beginning. As winter settled over the lake, bringing a peaceful blanket of snow and ice, I found myself reflecting on the journey of the past year. I had lost and regained my inheritance, but I'd gained something perhaps more valuable: a new understanding of myself and my family. The lake house had become more than just property. It was a symbol of my willingness to stand up for myself, to demand respect and fairness. Grandma Eleanor had known exactly what she was doing when she left it to me. She had given me not just a home, but a final lesson in self-worth. On New Year's Eve, I sat alone on the dock, bundled against the cold, watching the stars reflect on the frozen lake. The house behind me was warm and waiting, filled with memories of the past and possibilities for the future. I thought about how close I'd come to losing it all, and how fighting for what was rightfully mine had changed me forever. The lake house was mine, just as Grandma had intended. But more importantly, I had discovered my own voice, my own strength, my own unwavering sense of justice. And that, I realized as I watched the old year give way to the new, was the most valuable inheritance of all. Have you ever had to fight for something that was rightfully yours? How did you handle it? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if you found my journey meaningful, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who might need encouragement to stand up for themselves. Thank you for listening, and I wish you the strength to protect what matters most to you, just as I protected my lake house and my dignity.